What's up, guys? This is Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with Tesla SPY in the overall markets. I want to talk about some very key levels to watch for Teslas. We're seeing some new news coming out, not to mention big developments from Donald Trump and Jerome Powell that could affect how this market's going to be moving. But just know that I'm not a financial planner, so make sure you take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. The offer ends at the end of March, so let's break down what's happening so far. So as you guys can tell, Tesla's been on a very big downtrend. We keep on making lower highs and lower lows. If you just zoom out all the way, you guys can quite clearly see this. Rejection after rejection on the share price. But as of the last 2 months, Tesla has a very interesting pattern where we keep on rejecting off either our 50 or our 20 EMAs. And what do I mean by that? Well, look at this right here. We got this big sell-off in the first week of February. Then we saw Tesla push to almost our 50 EMA. We touched it. Then we got another big rejection move. And then there was actually another touch of our 20 EMA before the rejection. Right here, we pushed to the green line, the 20 EMA, then we rejected. We tried to get back to it, then we rejected. And in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if we try to get close to it before we reject again, most likely. But we'll see if we break past it or not. For now, the trend remains more bearish. One thing that is quite decent about Tesla, though, is the fact that we did fill our gap. So if you look at the share price, there have been instances where we come either close to gap support, or we fill a gap and then we try to bounce. This happened many times on Tesla. So for example, if you look back at the charts, there were times where we filled our gaps, came very close to supports. Like right here, we came close to filling this gap. Then we saw a temporary rebound move before we continued to dip. And that's dependent on our supports, right? So we lost support at that 270 area. And then that was our signal that Tesla would eventually come down to fill the gap. We did talk about that. And I want to mention there's another gap to fill all the way down here at 220. So I presume that most likely Tesla will come down to fill that gap in the future. Before we dump to fill that gap, though, that's going to be dependent on the reaction at 250. So far, what happened was the market was dumping. Then Jerome Powell gave a speech and the market actually bounced a little bit. So I'm going to be watching to see if we could bounce a little bit from here before we continue to dump. Yes, I think Tesla might fill this gap at 220 in the future, but because we touched 250 and there's buyers defending, we might see a temporary bounce first before we end up dumping later on. So I hope that's as clear as possible. That's what we're essentially watching for on the charts, and I'll break down more specific details of technical analysis in a bit. I first want to talk about some very important news about Tesla, Donald Trump, and Jerome Powell. So the first thing involving Tesla, let's actually push up Tesla right over here. You guys could see that for Tesla, we are technically on a bit of a downtrend. Baird gave Tesla an outperform rating despite the fact that they decreased their price targets to about $370 a share. So they're bullish, but they did decrease their target to some extent. But then what is worth mentioning is that the price-price ratio is very weak. So what does this mean? Why is the price-price ratio so weak, at least for us? The reason for that is because Tesla is dumping a lot compared to SPY, compared to the QQQ and many other futures. So Tesla is still a very weak chart when you look at the price-price ratio dumping like this, and that's not the best of signs. That's how the ratio is of Tesla's price action relative to the market. Now, Mondays and Tuesdays tend to be better for the stock, but we tend to be weaker towards the end of the week, at least historically. And historically, at least when you look at our data, we tend to do better around the month of April, and we tend to be weaker around May. May is actually a little bit weaker for Tesla historically, and then June tends to be a strong month. So from what I'm thinking is that if this downtrend were to continue going into the March to April period, we'll be looking for a nice bounce as we approach the unsupervised robotaxi launch event, at least coming up for at Texas very soon. So we'll see about that. But anyways, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. We just want to focus on the short term for now. The one thing worth mentioning is that Tesla is still showing weakness nonetheless. There's been a lot of talk about how their sales are declining in Australia. The Chinese-made sales are dumping. The German sales are down 70%, and the list goes on. There's lots of different analysts who are saying that Tesla is going to dump. They're going to fail when it comes to their deliveries reports, and a lot of things like that are causing uncertainty and fears for investors. On top of this, there's a lot of fear involving Donald Trump's tariffs. Tesla's lost over $700 billion in its overall market cap, at least for quite a while. Not the best of news. That's actually compared to where we were many months ago. We're much lower right now. We're down over 32% since about January 1st. So that's actually like crazy. Last month alone, we saw it down 28%. So it dumped quite a bit. So we're very weak right now, and there's still weakness on the chart. That's what we could basically tell from the news. What's happening with Donald Trump, though? I want to actually talk about his tariffs and what he's been talking about very recently. And I do have a very important update. I have a speech transcript I want to read from you, and I want to read some Donald Trump quotes for you guys. But first, here's what happened. Okay. We had Donald Trump, who is, I would say, he is trying to be very tactical right now. Whether you like him or not, that is what he's attempting to do. He first wanted to increase tariffs to 25% on Canada and Mexico, which kind of scared a lot of different investors, the stock market, all these different people. And then he's saying that he is basically going to change things for Mexico for their products and imports that comply with the 2020 USMCA trade pacts. They're going to be excluded from the 25% tariffs for a month. He also spoke with the Mexican president, and they came to a nice agreement to delay the tariffs for now, at least for the majority of products. So that's actually a decent piece of news. And then you have to keep in mind that he's going to continue to negotiate with Trudeau and the others, so that's worth mentioning. However, one thing that's causing uncertainty are some more claims that he has been making. So, for example, he's talking about how he wants to increase sanctions on Russia. He said that about different countries as well. Then he also said that the tariffs on Mexico and Canada could go higher than 25% if negotiations don't go in favor of the US. And I think this is also part of why the market's dipping. So, what I'm trying to say is like one day, we're increasing tariffs like crazy. The next day, they're alleviated a little bit. The next day, he's now saying he wants to increase tariffs above 25% if things don't go in the US's favor. What I'm saying is it's very, very uncertain for the markets, and it's causing a lot of fear. So that's part of why the market's reacting like this. There's a reason I bring all of this up because Jerome Powell did mention this. I will talk about Powell in just a second. First, let me talk about and read Donald Trump's speech, some very important quotes by him. Then I'll talk about Jerome Powell. It's very important to listen to this. So Donald Trump said, these are his quotes. He said, "We want to shrink the government and grow the private sector." He said that he wants auto parts to be built and made in the USA. Canada has extremely high tariffs on lumber, and we may do this today or tomorrow when it comes to our negotiations. He mentioned that the EU has been a terrible abuser of tariffs, and India has agreed to cut tariffs on the way down. Trump said we'll have more manufacturing jobs instead of government jobs. Then he went on about how so far there's not been so much of a disturbance to the US economy. I'm expecting good CEO data and reports. There will be modifications, but very little, and he wants to help companies create jobs. There will be some changes for the tariffs, but they're going to be very minor. Then he went on about how he wants to bring back auto jobs to the US. He went on talking about Ukraine and Russia, and then besides that, he said the same things basically over and over again about the tariffs, how they're going to be very necessary. He did say yesterday that we have to deal with the tariffs because for the short term, there will be a disruption, but for the long term, it's going to be worth it. And then he went on about how when it comes to negotiations, we could see another increase in tariffs on Mexico and Canada. So he went on about that as well. So that's what Donald Trump has been saying. And that is causing, at least that's contributing to why the market is selling off like this, because there's a lot of uncertainty about these tariffs. Will we see Donald Trump increase more tariffs? Will he delay them? Are we going to see another increase above 25% on tariffs for Mexico and Canada? He also mentioned he wants to increase tariffs on like dairy products. So it's madness, guys. This is part of why the market is just going crazy. Tesla is very weak because Tesla keeps on getting hit with lots of bad news about their sales and such. And then when it comes to the Fed, Jerome Powell said some very important things that caused the market to bounce. It also led to uncertainty for the markets. So Jerome Powell mentioned that he is going to be keeping interest rates on hold amidst this economic uncertainty and also because of the tariffs. That's what Jerome Powell is saying, and that's what's causing the market to see more volatility. So I'm going to read some quotes by Jerome Powell for you guys, and then I'll talk about what's happening with their economic data. Then I'll conclude by talking about the charts. Jerome Powell said that he is anticipating a route to 2% inflation, but for the longer term effects, things are looking okay. For the short term, the inflationary expectations are still a little bit up. He also mentioned that the Federal Reserve does not need to rush. They could take their time for greater clarity. He mentioned that, let me just double check this. There's uncertainty around policy changes and the effects remain very, very high. And because of that, there is a slowdown in consumer spending. So Jerome Powell said that. He said that some near-term survey data suggests that inflation is likely moving up, driven by the tariffs. So Jerome Powell said that. He said that the labor market is solid, and he thinks that inflation is somewhat above 2%, but it's moving closer to their targets. So he's still optimistic, and he's still keeping a calm head about inflation. Then he went on about how a lot of different policies affect them. Then he went on about that. He didn't say anything else that was too crazy, but let me just look through this. Then he started to talk about the tariffs. So he mentioned that it is not appropriate for the Fed to react to one time price spikes. And there's still very much uncertainty about what will be tariffed and for how long. So there's no need to redefine price stability. He mentioned that it is not simply what is happening with the tariffs, but with growth and other changes to the economic policy. If this turns into a series of actions or if tariffs are larger, then expectations could start to move and that would influence how the Fed reacts. So that's the main thing that Jerome Powell said. That's one of his most important quotes. He is not saying that it's tariffs alone that's going to cause the Fed to just increase or try to like keep rates the same or anything like that. It's more to do with the effects of them. Do they cause another increase in inflation? And if Donald Trump is going to continue to make them larger, then yes, he thinks that the Fed will have to take necessary action. But it does not make the sense for the Fed to react prematurely. The Fed is not just going to do whatever they have to do for no reason. They have to wait and see what happens with the data. But he did mention that for the time being, with all this uncertainty, they have to give this some time. So could the Fed keep rates higher for longer because of the tariffs? It's a possibility, but they're going to wait for the data. So we have to wait a couple of months to see what happens with our inflationary numbers and a bunch of factors like that. So lots of uncertainty for the markets, and that's what's incentivizing the Fed to not really cut. They're going to most likely keep rates the same and just wait. Jerome Powell is also going to maybe talk more about the tariffs during his next FOMC meeting speech. So keep that in mind. Anyways, three more quick things. Next week on Monday, we have consumer inflationary expectations. This might be a little bit elevated. On Tuesday, we have the JOLTS job openings and job quits. On Wednesday, we have CPI data coming out. On Thursday, we have PPI data. And then on Friday, we have Michigan consumer sentiment data. The most important days for next week are going to be Wednesday and Thursday when we have CPI and PPI data. For other factors, keep in mind we have Oracle announcing earnings alongside Kohl's. Other places, we have Adobe and many other retail. So keep that in mind. That's what's happening for earnings next week. And the market remains extremely fearful. There's extreme fear. We're not necessarily at greed or neutral. We're just super, super scared right now. And typically that does lead to the market trying to bounce, but we're not seeing that yet because of this uncertainty. So keep that in mind. Expect a lot of volatility and even more potential downside as long as the tariff news remains unstable, as long as there's a lot of uncertainty about that. So keep that in mind. So for Tesla, there is some good news. We're forming a bullish divergence right here. This may lead to a small push. So the last time we did this, we had a slight bullish divergence right here, and Tesla bounced just a little bit before this thing started to dump more. So in this case, there might be some temporary relief by about 10 points to about 272. Maybe it goes a little bit higher. We'll have to see about that. But then there's going to be a risk of more downside later on. The daily does look a little bit bullish, so we might see a temporary move up, maybe close to this trend line, either between 272 to 280. If we can't break the trend line, we're looking for a move even lower. So that's what I'm basically anticipating for now. We could go higher if we manage to hold above 280, but so far, every time Tesla bounces, we're rejecting off resistance. So might be a temporary bounce. We'll see if we reject off resistance immediately or not. And if we do, we're looking for another new low to be made. Whether we get a bigger bounce or a small bounce, we are still bearish overall in terms of our trend. So there is still more downside to come. Whether we get a bigger bounce or a small one to about 272 to 280 or even up to 290, we will reject later on afterwards. But look for a temporary bounce first, and we'll see if we get that rejection. On SPY, we have a good news and bad news. The bad news is we keep making lower highs and lower lows. The good news is we closed above our 200 EMA, so this might try to push us closer to about that 580 area, and then we'll see if we get a big rejection on SPY or not. I'll be watching that very, very closely, so just keep that in mind. If we break 580, we could go a little higher. If not, we could be looking for a rejection move. So be careful, guys. We're still technically bearish, technically speaking, but there might be a temporary push to about 580 or above first before we end up dumping. On the QQQ, it's the same thing. We're looking for that 490 support at the 200 EMA. If that holds, we could be going a little bit higher before we see a big rejection. If it doesn't hold, we could be looking for a big rejection move back down. So watch that very closely. The Russell 2000 could be bouncing towards this trend line at this 208 area. So we'll see if we reject or not. Might see a temporary move up, so give this some time. ES is once again holding our support. I think we're going to be visiting our 200 EMA again at 58.24. We'll see if we get a rejection off that. If we break through that, we could get closer to about 5,900 and then get the rejection. So it depends if we could break 58.24 or not, where this imbalance is. So watch for a temporary move up, and then we'll see if we get another big rejection. I'll be watching for that. Um, NQ, it held 20,000. That's a good sign so far. Could go a little bit higher to fill this imbalance to 20,500 before it rejects. If we break 20,500, we could go a bit higher first before another move down. So I'm going to be looking for a temporary relief move before it continues to dump. Bitcoin's trying to hold support as long as we don't lose 85,000. We could try to bounce back up for about 88,000 for a temporary move up. On Nvda, we have a gap to fill above. If we can get back above like this 115 area, I could be looking for an attempt to fill that, get back up to 117 just temporarily before this starts to dip. We're trying to turn the 4 hours, so there's some potential in this. Apple's also trying to rebound just a bit, but we do have a tough resistance to test around that 240 area that's also aligning with where this trend line happens to be. So Apple has this trend line, previous support becoming resistance up here. So what I think is we'll have to see how it reacts this. We might touch 240, then start dipping a bit before it tries to break out. We'll see about that. It's still bearish. We're making lower highs and lower lows. We might make a temporary move like this where we dip and try to go a little higher temporarily before we start dipping, right back down. So I'm looking to see if we could reclaim the trend line or not. Look for a small move down, if anything, like a pop and then a drop back down towards 235, and we'll see how it ends up reacting. Just a few more. I'm going to make this video very quick. Netflix has 900 to be retested. We'll see if we reject or not off of that. For AMD, we're trying to push a bit higher. We have an imbalance to fill at 101.5, so it might push a little bit more. Maybe there's like a double bottom here. It tries to go a bit higher before it starts to reject again. Coin is looking decent. We are range bound right now. So we have like a double bottom that's forming. There's a slight bullish divergence here. If we make a higher low here, it could kind of dip towards like 208 before it tries to bounce. Amazon's on a downturn, making lower highs at this 20 EMA, but I think that it might retest this. I'll go into more details about this on like Sunday. So I could see a test of 203 first before it potentially rejects. Even Meta might try to retest like 639 before it rejects. Sorry, 630. If we break that, then 639 is coming. I want to be a little bit more precise about that. So look for 630. If that breaks 639 is coming, then we could reject off either one of those. Microsoft might be retesting 398 to 400, then might reject off that. And then we have Google trying to hit 176. If that breaks, we're looking for 178, then we'll see if we reject. So with that being said, that's a quick analysis, guys. I will possibly upload another video tomorrow about Tesla. And then on Sunday, I'll give you guys a full detailed video about what I see happening to the markets. So please watch out for my next videos over the next couple of days. Until then, enjoy your weekend, guys. The market is very stressful, so please unwind, do what you have to do, and I'll see you guys very soon on the next one. Thank you for listening. Have a good weekend, and peace out.